My name is Mark Lamont Hill. I am the owner and minister of music at Uncle Bobbie. And I don't know.
Starting already.
Anyway, I'm happy to be here, and I couldn't be happier to have you all here for another one of our book events. As you know, Uncle Bobbie's is committed to highlighting the best ideas, the best authors, and some of the best work that's happening around the country through our author talks. And tonight we are lucky to have a book that is hot off the press. It's a wonderful contribution to our national and really international conversation about race, about white supremacy, about justice, and two really brilliant writers and thinkers and editors are here tonight to join us. The book, of course, is called How We Fight White Supremacy, and I want to read the accolades properly. Because we have, to my far left, we have Kenrya Rankin. She is a deputy editor at Color Lines. She is an award-winning author, journalist, and editorial consultant. Could you give her a round of applause, please? And we also have Philadelphia's own. It's a home game. West Philly, born and raised. Kwanzaa is what she spent most of her days. Panels. I ain't lying though. Hakeem is where she spent most of her days. She is the senior editorial director at Color Lines. She's an NABJ award-winning journalist. She's a wonderful editor. I've known Akiba for literally decades now. And before I met Akiba, I was reading Akiba in The Source, back when it was good and serious. I'm serious. And Akiba always had an ability to take even things that seemed ordinary and make them extraordinary. She was able to spotlight the genius in Black life. And the texture and nuance of Black life. And so I'm always excited to be around Akiba. And Kenrya is a genius too.
She is a
no, I'm serious. And when Akiba first told me about her, I was excited. And when I heard you two were working on this project together, I became even more excited. Because we're often in a moment where we talk about the existence of white supremacy, and we have an analysis of white supremacy, but we don't necessarily talk about how we can fight white supremacy. And so this volume of amazing people and amazing thinkers is a gift to all of us. My humble request is that y'all read just a little bit of the intro for us so we can see exactly where this book is going.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So just one order of business. Kenrya is the editorial director of Color Lines now. No,
I got a promotion.
She got a promotion.
Oh!
Okay, so we are going to start by telling you what this book isn't. Although we sought out a diverse group of contributors, this collection isn't exhaustive. It does not apply an international lens, and it doesn't include Black conservatives. We know that anyone who is truly interested and invested in dismantling the intricate system of white supremacy will learn from this book, but it's not here to tell you what to do, and it's not written with anyone but Black folks in mind. See no explanatory commas in the next section. It's also important to know that we began working on this book long before the election of the 45th President of the United States. The acts of resistance it chronicles are not defined by the actions of one man, but by the collective longing for a justice that has so far eluded us.
So I'm going to tell you what this book is. How We Fight White Supremacy is a curated, multidisciplinary collection that serves as a showcase for some of our most powerful thinkers and doers. It starts in the middle of a Black-ass conversation. You won't find any explanatory commas about our cultural mores here. Speaking of which, to reflect the permanence of our resistance, we organized the book according to Black conventional and contemporary wisdom, with chapters like Laugh to Keep from Crying, which touches on our gallows humor, Get Information, which is about grassroots organizing, and Love Me or Leave Me Alone, which is about how we love ourselves whole. Each chapter starts with our take on why a particular category of resistance is integral to the fight and ends with our very personal reflections on the matter. Seriously, this collection has everything. Thoughtful interviews, am I really crying right now? Essays, ridiculously relatable fine art, unexpected profiles, crying, laughing, emoji face, funny fiction, reflections from everyday people on their everyday resistance, get hype playlists, and more, all breathe in these pages.
But most of all, this is a book about freedom dreams. We're well aware of the problems we're buried beneath. We can feel the weight of them on our limbs, the heft of them on our abdomens, as our second brains gnaw on the indignity of it all. But what does it look like for Black people to claw our way to fresh air? What does freedom feel like? How does it taste on the tongue? For some folks in this book, it feels like raising kids who gleefully take up space for themselves. For others, it looks like providing the tools we need to triumph over race-based trauma. There's the pastor who envisions a day when, following his radical dark-skinned Jesus, who always sides with the dispossessed, will lift us out of this hole. And the organizer who can almost smell the sharp aroma of reforming the nation's political system. And we can't forget the professor who dreams of the day when we can bring our full selves to every table.
Although this book is not prescriptive, because if we had a magic button that we could press to end this nightmare, we would have leaned on it a long time ago. It is thoughtful and hopeful and bursting with agency. In immersing ourselves in the work of others, we can define and refine our own work. In reveling in the freedom dreams of our beloved, we can labor to make them lucid. The reality is this: if we don't make time to close our eyes, breathe deeply, push beyond the binds we're in, and visualize a day when they don't exist, we can never truly be free.
I guess the first question I have is the conceptualization of the book itself. Mm-hmm. You could have written a book called How to Fight Racism.
Yeah.
And it may have even been more popular. White folk love to talk about racism at this moment.
Yeah, they like to talk about racially tinged stuff.
Absolutely. Fair point. Fair point. Withdrawn, Your Honor. But white supremacy is a whole other thing. Why that approach? Why that framework?
So I think that very often, although as I just said, people don't really like to say the word racism, it's easier to separate yourself from something that looks like wearing a hood or carrying a tiki torch, right? White supremacy is a system. So as we define in the book, it's a cultural, political, and economic system that thrives on the subjugation of people who are not white. When you have to look at it as a system that you're living in, that you are perpetuating even without realizing that you are, that's a lot harder to tackle.
And the idea of tackling it, the second piece of the book, right? Or the second piece of the title, right? Or maybe the first piece, which is the idea of fighting. Again, you didn't linger in analysis, although there's plenty of analysis here. Why was it important for the framework to be fighting white supremacy?
Well, because I feel like we're in a perpetual state of resistance. I mean, we're here, right? If we didn't fight, then we would not be here as a people. And I think it's just important because people need to understand that all is not lost, that it's not hopeless, and also that there are a variety of ways that people can fight white supremacy. So it doesn't always look like picket signs or grassroots organizing, although, you know, those are both really powerful tools. But it's also, you know, the day-to-day work of, say, someone who starts a business to purposely bring money back into the Black community. Or, again, you know, it's a clergy person who talks about who talks about the dispossessed and being very serious and having an analysis around religion and race. And so we wanted to really talk about the variety of ways that people fight, and we wanted, when people leave the book, we'll close the book and finish the book, that they don't feel like they can't do anything or that no one's doing anything, because we do things all day, every day.
Sometimes it's just getting out of bed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that I found powerful about the book, is that I was reading, so I was like, there's a way that you could read this book and identify what you do already that you may not have even realized was resistant.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about laughing to keep from crying. Talk to me a little bit about what that means for Black folk.
Well, I mean, humor is subversive for Black people. You know, we have a history of not being able to articulate or bring our full selves. You know, we come not too long ago from a place where you couldn't look a white person in the eye. They didn't like how you had your face. So one of the ways that we've been able to subvert and fight white supremacy is through our sense of humor, and a lot of times it's a shared sense of humor. So there's actually, in the book, there is a formerly enslaved man named Jordan Davis, and he he was freed during the Civil War, and then his master wrote him a letter inviting him to come back to the plantation, him and his wife, so they could just restore, you know, how they had the setup. And he wrote, he couldn't be like,
that's a hell of a request. Can we just stipulate that first? Come on back.
Yeah. So, but you know, he couldn't just be like, you know,
right,
go away. So he wrote this letter, and the letter is like one of the funniest things I've ever read, because he starts off and he's like, you know, dear Massa, thank you for your offer. You know, you did shoot me twice, but that's okay. And then basically he makes the argument for, you know, reparations, back pay. So he's like, you know, we will think about it if you pay us what we are owed with interest. His wife Mandy, he's like, Mandy's concerned about us getting what we need. So thank you for the offer. And it's just like, that is hilarious. Right. That is so funny.
Right. But he could have just said, nah. Right? I mean, that is on the table, right? It wouldn't be an unreasonable response to the whole come back to slavery, you know, optionally. He could have said hell no. He could have said hell no, right? But there's something about that response that does something for him.
It does. I mean, it clowns an entire system. It clowns the idea that somebody should be a master, somebody should own a person, and that person would, again, have the gall after you are free to be like, hey, can you come back? It's like, I mean, really, like, who does that? And so I'm sure he was also seething when he wrote it. Right. But he knew. I mean, he wrote this down, and like I said, it's some of the best material I've ever read in my life.
And so in the book, you have Amanda Seals, you have Damon Young, you have a range of comedic voices who at this moment are engaged in very similar projects. On the one hand, reflecting on how, at the meta level, you know, how we can do this work, but also actively doing it through their stand-up or through their writing. Damon's book comes out very soon.
It came out.
It came out. I'm sorry, what I meant to say is Damon's coming here very soon. He'll be here in 2 weeks. The book came out.
Commercial.
Yeah, but we're going to buy this one today. Just but when you look at comedians today, or comedic writing today and comedic performance today, what are you seeing? Are you seeing us using that as a viable way to resist white supremacy?
I think we do. I think we use it subversively, but then there's also the escapism that comes with it, right? Like sometimes it just looks like being able to put the other things away for a minute and just laugh and be together in the moment. Like, I used to be a comedy editor, for a humor editor for Reader's Digest, and so I used to go to comedy clubs all the time. Yeah. So sometimes it's awful. Like when somebody bombs, you feel really bad for them. But when it's great and the whole room is together and you're just hanging on to this person's every word, you're not thinking about anything else that's going on outside of the room. But then there's the other thing of like watching Dave Chappelle talk about cops sprinkling crack on folks. Right. And you're laughing because it's funny, but also it's not funny because it happened in Baltimore where they were planting drugs on people. And so that's another, subversive way that we use our humor to talk about the issues in ways that maybe make them more palatable to folks. Yeah. Where it may be more difficult to get them to sit down and read a report that details what the Baltimore police were doing to people, but now you're informed and that legit happened.
Right. And then when you see the Baltimore thing and you remember Dave saying, oh yeah, sprinkle some crack on them, it's more legible to us because we have a point of reference. I can see that. Another thing that I was thinking about is the kind of activist moment we're in. You wrote this book before the election of He Who Shall Remain Nameless.
Right. Beetlejuice speaking.
But after Ferguson.
Right. Yes.
So there's a really interesting kind of, I don't want to say resurgence, but there's a really interesting moment of activism and organizing that happens in a post-Ferguson context. You said organizing and activism isn't the only way that we can fight white supremacy. But as you said, it is a way. What kind of stuff? What kind of stuff are you thinking about? What kind of people do we have included? I'm looking at like Patrisse Cullors. I'm looking at
I mean, Patrisse Cullors is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, and we also have Alicia Garza in the book as well. And I mean, the thing that was so meaningful, at least personally to me, about Black Lives Matter was that, we have been talking about issues of police violence against Black people, and that being a part of a white supremacist system for decades?
Yeah.
Longer than decades. And there got to be a point where people were desensitized to it. I mean, I remember when I was at the Source and Amadou Diallo got shot, I think it was 26 times or something like that. And that was a big case. But, I mean, we weren't talking about Eleanor Bumpers, that had happened, to a grandmother in Brooklyn, 20 years before.
Right.
So it just became this running occurrence of Black people being killed by police, and folks just kind of saying in our mind that's what happens as a defense mechanism. So the idea of Black Lives Matter that to me was so revolutionary was the idea that this actually isn't supposed to happen.
Right.
Like this is not supposed to happen. And then the framing around it, naming it as a Black issue, I thought was important too.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that definitely, and also it located young organizers, and it located organizers that weren't the usual suspects. So
Right.
You had LGBTQ folks, you had folks that aren't professional organizers, you had people who, were teachers or writers or whatever else.
Right.
And that was another innovation, I think, of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Absolutely. Do you feel like the conversation has changed since that moment in Ferguson?
I think it's more people have joined it. At its core, the name itself, Black Lives Matter, is an assertion of our humanity, and what white supremacy seeks to do is to take that away. It seeks to take away who we are as humans. When you can kill a young Black child and call him a thug as opposed to calling him a child, versus what you would call a white boy of the same age, you are saying that he is not human in the same way that boy is. And so the conversation to me around Black Lives Matter really said, we are human too.
Right.
And I think in framing it in that way, it helped to bring more folks into the conversation.
You mentioned young people. Chapter 4. These titles are so Black.
That's not Black.
Title 4 is called "I'm Not One of Your Little Friends." I ain't gotta tell y'all what that means. I love being in a place where I ain't gotta say what that means. But one of the things that you talk about is there's a line I was gonna read, but because of profanity I won't. But there's a very specific point you talk about how in a way these young people can be careless in the best sense of the word, right? But also fearless. And there's a way that our children are not just being led by us, but are leading us.
Yeah, definitely.
Talk about that a little bit. The significance of these young folk.
So you talk about Sydney, I'll talk about Nia.
You talk about how now?
You talk about Sydney, I'll talk about Nia. No,
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, in that chapter we profile a bunch of kids who are doing great things, and we also profile folks who are working for kids. So we have like a criminal justice, an attorney who specifically works for and with children. We have my daughter who is 7, who is in that first little part. That's who
Yes.
Becky is. And one of the kids that we talk about is, we talk to, is this guy named Sidney Keys III, and he read a statistic that said that Black boys stop reading at a certain age, and he was starting to see it in himself, where he wasn't enthusiastic about it anymore, and so he decided that he was going to do something about it. And it started out with just him in a bookstore reading a book, and his mama taped it and they put it online and it went viral. And it's sad that a video of a little boy reading is such a big deal that it becomes a viral thing, but that's what happened. And he was like, well, this is crazy. I shouldn't be the only one reading. He started a book club where he brought together boys in St. Louis to read, and not just to read, but to read books that centered them. so that they can see themselves. And one of the things he says in the book is, you know, I really want to do fiction because all we ever see are these books about like Martin Luther King Jr. and like, you know, he was like, and that's important. That's a part of our history. That's a part of who we are. But sometimes I just want to see somebody who just looks like me and who like goes to school and eats pizza and likes to play with his friends. And so that has been the focus of that. And that's his way of resisting. And, you know, as we were talking about, you know, we often think of picket lines and being organizers as being the main mode, but there's so many others. And I love that he found his way that felt very personal to him.
And so another, she calls herself an accidental activist, a young woman named Nia Kenny, who in South Carolina in her class, there was another black girl who had a cell phone, and the teacher told her to put the cell phone away. She didn't put it away. She didn't protest, like she wasn't like, no, but you know, she just didn't put it away.
She was a kid.
She was a kid. So anyway, the teacher and other adults escalated the situation, and they brought in a school resource officer, or what is that called?
School resource officer.
School resource officer, the resource being policing. And, you know, brought that person in, and that person came in and picked up the girl in the desk and tipped the desk over.
He threw her across the room.
He threw her across the room. And so Nia Kenny, first of all, she recorded the attack. And then second of all, she stood up. Like she stood up and she was just like, wait a minute, you know, and she stopped it. And she actually faced charges herself. She was charged with disturbing the school. And so, you know, she was in handcuffs. You know, she was criminalized for standing up for a child who was being tipped over and thrown across the room. And so, you know, Nia did not consider herself to be an activist at all. And in fact, a lot of what she was thinking during that time was, my mother's going to kill me because I got in trouble. But, you know, she realized that she did have to stand up, and subsequent to this happening, she ended up working with Kimberly Crenshaw, who is the, I guess, the creator and the key architect of the idea of intersectionality. So she works with the African American Policy Institute with Kimberly Crenshaw, and she's also working with the ACLU to, she's suing school district
to change that law.
Yes.
Because under this disturbing schools law, any teacher is very subjective. So they can say you're chewing your gum too loudly, you're disturbing the school, and they can be charged and put into jail. And so she's working to have that law taken off the books in South Carolina.
It's like disorderly conduct outside of school. It can be anything, you know, and it's used to basically arbitrarily pick up, arrest, criminalize black folk.
Right.
I'm excited by one of the chapters that excited me the most. I was reading an interview with Darnell Moore, and I was thinking about this idea, not just of grace, which he takes up, but also this idea about faith as a site to fight white supremacy. And I think it's particularly interesting at this moment because so many folk unfortunately think about our faith traditions as being allies to white supremacy, that the church reinforces a white Jesus, that we're taught to not love ourselves in this religion or that religion. And part of what the book reminds us of and gives concrete material examples of to me is the idea that has not to be the case at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And I mean, it didn't have to stop with the civil rights movement. I mean, I think that, you know, people, of course, there should be a lot of discussion about the role of the black church in the civil rights movement, it being a meeting place, it being somewhere to activate folks, it being somewhere to fortify folks. But that doesn't mean that ended when the civil rights movement ended. We have liberation theology. We have theology rooted in the black experience, black history, and, you know, an idea of a Jesus who is a Semitic gentleman with kinky hair, who's not, you know, the blonde Jesus who looks, you know, with skull-colored eyes or whatever. Like, that's not Jesus to these folks. And I think it's really important that we understand, number one, you know, the history even of Christianity, but then understand how we can use it to resist and to ultimately freedom dream as well.
Wow. This idea of freedom dream that you come back to, our idea, you know, Robin Kelly gives us in the book Freedom Dreams, in the Black Radical Imagination, and he challenges us to think about freedom dreams and to think about things in these different ways. every movement leader, every organizer, every activist has their own freedom dreams. When you two think about what freedom looks like post white supremacy, because you've convinced me that we're gonna win.
Oh, okay.
All right. You gotta read the whole book. Once you read the whole book, you'll be convinced.
Yeah, you get there.
But what does that look like? What does freedom look like after white supremacy?
So, as you're saying, you get through the book, the last chapter is all about freedom dreaming. And we challenge folks to... So white supremacy is jealous, it's a liar, it's a distraction. It wants to take up all your time, all the time, so that you can't see beyond it. And so what we're hoping is that we can get to a place, hopefully when you hit this last chapter, where you can close your eyes and you can think about what that looks like for you personally, and what that looks like for us collectively, and what that feels like, and what the work is that you will do that will help to bring us there. And so then Akiba and I each write our essays about what it looks like to us personally. It's such a broad concept, so we kind of brought it down. So for me, I write about it looking like being free of the white gaze and being able to bring my whole self everywhere I go. So that looks like me not code switching. I don't do that anymore. It looks like not doubting why I'm at the table and if I've earned my place there. There's no imposter syndrome when we are done with white supremacy. It looks like, not being made to feel like I am less than because I am black and I am a woman and I am not wealthy and I am not at the top of that hierarchy that is white supremacy. And that'll play out in all the different ways. And I liken it in the essay to being the self that I am in the text message group with my closest friends. When I can say all the things I can't say on Twitter because of the white gaze and because of respectability politics and all of those things that keep you from being you. When I get to be that person all the time.
That's free now. How about you?
I mean, I think white supremacy is really quite good at dividing people, for one, and it's very good at convincing people who are at the top of the hierarchy or imagine themselves to be at the top of the hierarchy to do things that are against their best interests. So, for instance, the 45th president of the United States, right? This is somebody who ran on white supremacy. That was his message, right? And poor white folks who, worked in factories that he claimed he was going to save, it was the complete opposite, right? And they're catching hell just like everybody else. And so, I think part of freeing ourselves or breaking white supremacy is that you really, you understand how this system really does subjugate everybody. And once we can get away from that, then we can really start to think about, ideas of equality, not as an abstraction, but like literally equality. Creating a place where everybody has food to eat, where everybody has medical care, where everybody has a home, where resources are not being extracted and brought over and exploited. So, to me, it's about breaking a structure, and I think what you talk about as a woman and individual in a structure breaking out, like I've been thinking just about what a structure would look like again, where you can be this person. Yeah. And also that it doesn't have this hierarchy, because that hierarchy is dangerous.
You two, and then I'm going to take some questions from you. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions from you, and also to sign these books next door. But you talked about housing equality. You talked about people having living wages, essentially. That's economic stuff, right? Then I'm looking in the book, and I'm seeing people who identify as queer, people identify as trans, people. I'm looking at this. The first chapter is about getting information, right? And it's not just that you got Tarana Burke and you know what I mean, and other folk talking about this issue around feminism, but that you're bringing in feminism as a piece of a project of dismantling white supremacy. So what I appreciate about the book and what I'd love for y'all to say a little bit about before we go to these questions is how people can make sense of an anti-white supremacy project that has the center of it all these other issues around economic justice, around gender justice, around all these other things. Because a whole bunch of folk that would say, that stuff's important, but we gotta get this white supremacy monkey off our back first, and then we can deal with the other stuff. And you all are saying, nah, there's something else here, there's another way to think about this.
Well, because, I mean, the other stuff is a byproduct of white supremacy or white supremacist system. The other stuff helps compound white supremacy. And the other stuff also takes us away from liberatory framework. And so, you know, we don't think that if we beat white supremacy but we still had transphobia, then we didn't beat white supremacy.
Yeah. So I'll read a little bit that actually speaks to that. So we refer to the Combahee River Collective in the Black Feminist Statement from 1977, and it really gives a good framework for this. So it says, the most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. We might use our position at the bottom to make a clear leap into revolutionary action. If Black women are free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression.
Yes.
Ooh. That's heavy. That's the Combahee Statement, by the way, which is next door. No, I'm not trying to sell y'all, but you know I don't do that. I'm just telling you, it's worth thinking about. Kianga Yamani Taylor wrote, edited a volume that only has a statement in it, but some kind of updated set of responses to it that I think is interesting to think about. And that statement is so powerful, that white supremacy is such a thorough project that we can't begin to dismantle it unless we think about these other things too. And so when you are in conversation with particular strands of Black nationalists who would disagree with that analysis, right? They would say, yes, but white supremacy is the thing that binds all of our oppression. How do we enter a conversation with them that's productive and healthy and that allows us to take seriously the point you're making?
So,
and I ask that because a lot of them be in this room.
So one of the ways that I like to explain it is that white supremacy thrives on hierarchy. So the person who sits at the top of the hierarchy is a white, cisgendered, heterosexual, wealthy, Christian man.
White man.
I said white person.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that man in this, and I can't even call it imagine hierarchy because it's the thing, is right here. If you take a woman who has all those other things, she's white, she's cisgender, she's heterosexual, whatever, when you give her that hierarchy, she understands that patriarchy and misogyny are things and that she suffers from them. She understands that she is not in that number one spot. She is in that number two spot. When you talk to a Muslim man and you list all those things, he understands, I am not Christian. I am not in that spot. When you help people to understand, again, that it's a system, and it lets them see where they are slotted in, and that if we don't tackle the thing that keeps them from being at the top of that hierarchy, it makes it easier for them if they are willing and have an open mind and actually want to understand why we have to tackle all of them so that we can flatten that whole thing out.
Gotcha. What role do white people play in this?
The role, so what we've been saying when people ask us about how white people can be a part of fighting white supremacy is three things. Number one, to be courageous. So white fragility, you know, this idea where you confront, or white people feel confronted by the fact that there is white supremacy or racism, and they freak out, and you're just like, why are you crying? I don't understand. You know, be courageous, and also be courageous when dealing with other white folks. So, you know, don't put on, you know, the internet that you couldn't talk about white supremacy because you didn't want to get into a fight, ruin Thanksgiving with your uncle. Like, okay, we have a lot of ruined Thanksgivings, okay? So that's number one. Number two, we encourage people to understand that it's their responsibility too. Like, it isn't charity, you know.
You're not just helping us, you're helping us all.
Right, you're helping us all. You have to be a part of vanquishing the system. And then number three, there are specific resources that you can go to. So there's a group called Showing Up for Racial Justice. And they are a racial justice organization by and for white people that teaches them a lot of fundamentals and teaches them, how to do anti-racist work. And so, we always talk about SURGE because it's incredibly burdensome for a person who is the direct recipient of white supremacy to come to somebody who is under white supremacy and ask them what they should do.
Okay. And that's actually the fourth part of it, is don't expect black people to do labor for you. There are books like this that you can buy and you can get the information. Google is there, it exists, and it wants to help you. You can do that.
But start with the book.
Start with
White people buy 2 of those.
and hand
One to
them
your
out.
friend. Right. That's a great form of
Fighting. It's a
fighting
form of resistance.
and
Yes.
support and reparations. They not saying that, I'm saying that. Don't hold them accountable for my bad behavior. Questions from the audience, please. Yes, it's in the back.
My question, when you're talking about the hierarchy of white supremacy, what about those people that are comfortable in their position? Like for the last election, like we noticed that there were a lot of people in the number 2 spot that were very comfortable in their number 2 spot. And even going down the line, there are people in number 3 and 4 spot, 5, that they're comfortable in their position and they don't want to shake down that hierarchy because they're comfortable in their place. So how are we going to, how are we just going to convince everybody to just be a good person and do what's right when whether we want to admit it or not, we all kind of somewhat benefit from this system in a way.
Well, I would argue that we don't all somewhat benefit from the system, but yeah, I don't know that we can. I'll be honest with you. I don't know that a white man who sits in that number 1 spot or a white woman who sits in that number 2 spot, that we can absolutely convince them. I also don't know that it's our job. That's why we tell white people to gather their own.
I can add.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing about, people in the second slot, white women, is that there's a political belief in this country that is not actually supported by data that white women don't benefit from white supremacy. So, or even the idea, or perpetuated, or compounded. There's this idea, for instance, the mythology that white women were victims of slavery just like we were because, they were subjugated to men. I throw all of that out, right?
Yeah.
Good.
You have agency now, number 1, and number 2, I do think that there's a lot of belief that there's some de facto feminism with just being a woman and being a white woman, and that is complete bull. There are plenty of anti-feminist white women. There are plenty of white women who are hostile to justice. There's plenty of women who are hostile to other women. And so this idea, of maintaining hierarchy, I think, yes, there are people who benefit from it, or there are people who experience it less than others. But I think the folks at the top, I don't know what to tell them to do to stop. I don't know what to make them do. But it needs to, I know it needs to happen, and it's not going to happen by us trying to convince people of something.
And I think we also have to look at the fact that, I said white supremacy is a liar, right? Every time the New York Times publishes a story about people who regret that they voted for 45, I'm reminded of that. They led with their whiteness. They led with supporting the system of white supremacy and forgot that he was doing everything he could to keep money out of their pockets, to take away their health insurance, to, to take away their jobs for folks who work in certain industries. But they were so blinded by the bright lights of white supremacy and by the idea that they are climbing that ladder that they forgot that they were getting, pushed down to.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I always think about with that election, and it's just like Trump. Oh, I said his name.
He gonna show up.
Now you got my
Nobody else say it, yo.
We got some sage in the back.
This individual is openly and brazenly misogynistic and violent toward women.
Yes.
He champions sexual assault and sexual harassment.
Yeah.
So the idea that you would be someone who is the object, and you got to see video of him doing this, and you still voted for him.
53%, right?
53%, it tells you that you are too committed to a system that does not benefit you. Like, you literally voted for somebody who admitted on camera and thought it was funny to grab. And that's really sick. You know, that's a really sick thing to do. Like, why, you see this person and you see how misogynistic he is and you're just like, I can just excuse that. What are you talking, like, sexual assault, what are you talking about right now?
Because white supremacy.
Right. And the alternative was a white woman. That's the other interesting part. It wasn't like it was two white men running, right?
Right.
Even if you just don't close ranks around your white womanhood, you could have did it that way.
Right.
You could go radical and did the other white woman. You just got, you got a lot of other options.
And that's what happens when you aspire to the top spot. You step on the other folks to get there.
Powerful. We're going to go here and then here.
What you'll do to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother, one second, we're going to go here and then right to you, my brother. Yes, I know.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
He can always ask you.
No, he was just saying, brother. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, so mine is more so of a comment. So I'm not sure that I'm trying to convince those who have these beliefs that white supremacy is the right way or the correct way. I think my job is to teach, this is my 10-year-old son, to recognize that there are people still in the world who are like this, they exist, and I have to teach them to be able to exist in this world and to be able to thrive in this world, because you're right, their reality is not our reality. And I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, but I am grateful of different forms where the ignorance is demonstrated. So I am sure to be reminded, I have to teach my children how to live in this racist world.
Absolutely.
And that's part of white supremacy, right? Like having to tell your child about something that is utterly wrong and nonsensical and dangerous. And, you know, the idea of walking down the street and that being a danger is really, really corrosive and traumatic. So,
It's nuts.
yeah, it is.
Yes, sir, Bobbie Solomon.
Okay. So to what degree do you think this entire country feels about poverty?
Well, I wouldn't say the entire country, because I mean it involves people who are in poverty, but I think that this country definitely vilifies poverty. This country tells people that if you are poor, it's because you didn't work hard enough. It says that you should have less than everybody else. It says that you are sucking up all the air and sucking up all the resources, which is a complete lie. And so, yes, I mean, I think this country and its hostility toward poor folks is definitely an issue and part of white supremacy. And then the other thing I would say is that in this political system, I mean, even if we're talking about Democrats or whomever, the conversation is always about the middle class, right?
Yeah.
Like the only person that I remember who, you know, campaigned on poverty was John Edwards, and he got knocked out because he didn't know how to be faithful to his wife. But I mean, but it's like all, you know, so these people are supposed to be progressive and they're still like the middle class, the middle class, the middle class. And that speaks to, again, how people vilify poverty, but also, if you think about it, how people put poverty in lockstep with white supremacy. So this idea that all black people are poor, or this idea that, you know, white folks aren't the biggest recipients of public assistance, which they are, right? And so it's like you can use white supremacy once again to, you know, deny your responsibility to everybody.
And to get white people to vote against their own interests.
Right, definitely, yeah. Yeah, because you're like, oh, I'm going to pay for it with my whiteness. And you're like, you don't have any money. And they're like, but I'm white. And you're like, that doesn't work. So, Mom?
I'm blowing my cover.
Now I'm going to switch. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the technical parts of creating this book. So here's this amazing list of people.
Ooh, yes.
So how'd that happen? Names in a hat? I mean, talk about that process.
Can y'all just take 1 second to look at that list? Yes. I mean, you got Mumia Abu-Jamal, Harry Belafonte, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Oh my God, Tarana Burke. I don't know how you pulled that one up. You got, You got Jay Smooth. I mean, Hockey Matter. I'm talking about the range. I'm not saying they're all equivalent. I'm saying the range of people. I mean, you got legends. You got young legends. You got elders in the community. You got people who are the hottest. Amanda Seals just did an HBO special. You got her. You know what I'm saying? Like, how y'all did that?
We asked.
We are at, so, you know, as we said, we started working on this before the election. And then the election happened, and our agent was like, oh, we about to make more money. and the reality is, because then white supremacy, for those of us who were unafraid, became a thing that we started talking about. Yeah. And these were folks who felt like they had something that they wanted to say. And they weren't afraid, and they said yes when we asked. And I mean, some of it took persistence, like Mr. B, which is what you gotta call Harry Belafonte. Took a while to get to him, but then he was on it, and it was such a great conversation. And yeah, we asked people, and they said yes, and we went to friends, and we cold called, and we tracked people down, and we used all of our reporting skills that we've honed over all these years as journalists. And this is what we came out with, and we're really happy with the group that we got.
And just to be clear, because they're being modest, asking is important, persistence is important, but it takes a special duo of editors who have earned the respect of these extraordinary people to give their time and their talent to make this happen. Anybody couldn't have done this. It took these two to do this. So y'all should be commended for that. That means this list says everything about y'all. You got any cousins here?
No, I haven't. My cousin Shell's there, but her hand is up.
We'll go to you. We go you and then Layla, yes, and then we'll come back up here. Yeah. We have time for about 4 more.
Do you speak in your book or share white supremacy as a construct, basically as a mindset? How can I say this and not be too, I'm not trying to be offensive, but basically, whites are emotionally oppressed because they know genetically we are highly genetic in such a way that we're dominant. There is a group way at the top who is aware of our dominant genes. So to play the psych is to be white supremacy, but basically they know the truth about us. I just want to put that out there.
We'll put that out there. Let me take yours now. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to take 2 at a time, I think, just to make sure we get. Okay. Yeah.
Given that white supremacy by definition sets up these hierarchies, where do we situate ADOS?
What is that?
The American Descendants of Slavery? Where do we situate that, and how is it informed by white supremacy, or is it necessary for this conversation around reparations?
I mean, I think it's definitely necessary around the conversation about reparations, and that's not to minimize the effects of colonialism on, you know, people of color globally. That is not to minimize the struggle that people have had when they, immigrate here. But reparations is a really particular tool. It's not to right everything, unfortunately, but the brand of reparations that at least, I've heard the conversation about is people who are descendants of and direct victims of the enslavement of Black people. And so I think that there is some chat, on Twitter or whatever, people will say, well, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? Well, what if they get, and it's just like, okay, that's a good way to end the conversation. That's a good way to confuse the conversation. For me, at least, reparations, again, are about a very particular system. They're about a group of people who built this country. They're about a people who the wealth gap is huge because their labor was extracted from them for centuries. And the descendants of those people are the people that I think deserve the reparations that we're talking about right now.
That's right. But you say about dominant or recessive genes in your book. That's my question.
No. No, we don't write about that.
All right.
So I'm kind of playing devil's advocate in a sense, but I just wanted, do you find that the category is sort of separating Black people throughout the diaspora? Like, who gets what?
No, I don't think that. And I think the reason I don't think that is because African American people are in the diaspora, And us saying that we're African American describes where we are from and part of what our experience is. And I don't think it's inherently divisive to talk about African Americanness. Now, I think us as a people, we shy away from division. In part, it's a cultural value, but also it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But again, if we're talking about a particular intervention, if we're talking about a tool to, help right the scale, I do think that African Americans need to be at the center of that.
That's right. We had I'm going to take these 2 questions, and I'm going to take these last 2 questions. So we're going to take these 2, get responses, and then go to these last 2, and then we're going to sign some books. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, how do you say your name again?
Kenrya.
Kenrya, okay. You had mentioned earlier that that you used to code switch and you don't do it anymore. So can you talk to us about why, like what did you do before? How did you code switch? And then what made you stop? And how do you present yourself and how do you enter the room now?
Okay. And then your question was?
Yeah, I respect that you clearly laid out that your book is not for conservatives or black conservatives, but I think white supremacy thrives on a hierarchy, but it also thrives on the denial of its existence, and black conservatives are the best agents of that denial, and they're used as a tool to perpetuate that denial. Could you talk a little bit about, maybe is there a way, who should be reaching out to them, if not you, and I don't want to do it either, but if not us, then who and how?
You take each of those.
I'm not signing up for that committee.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
part of different committee.
Right. That ain't your ministry.
It ain't ours either, girl. So for me, it mostly looked like putting on my white voice. And growing, and I think that's a relative thing, right? I grew up in a really mixed suburb, so to my cousins, I was white. I sound like a white girl anyway. That's the thing that we do. And it was something that I definitely did as I got older, depending on what space I was in, how I felt like I needed to put that on in order to gain the respect and to thrive under white gaze. And I think part of what changed it for me was, one, changing the way that I worked. So I used to work at magazines. Magazine publishing is like one of the whitest things you can ever do.
And the most racist things you can ever do.
It is incredibly racist. It is the most anti-black spaces I have ever been have been in the offices of magazines.
Wow.
Especially women's beauty magazines.
That's right.
It is corrosive. It is violent. And when I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and I started my own company, my own consultancy, and started freelancing, I have not worked in an office in 11 years.
Yes.
And it was when I got to that point, when I got to the point where I took control of my career in that way so that I could, do the work from my home. I didn't have to go into those spaces that were designed to make me feel less than. That I really came into my own power and realized that the way that I sound, the accent that I have is mine, and that I don't need to change it in order to demand some type of, some respect under that gaze, that who I am is worthy and I don't have to question that. And it doesn't mean that I don't still suffer from imposter syndrome. Like, that is a real thing, and I think it's a real thing that a lot of women encounter. It's something that I had to deal with coming on this tour. That's why therapy is everything.
Shout out to therapy.
Yes. We talk about therapy a lot in the book, actually.
Yes.
My best friend is a psychologist.
Shout out to Monica Thompson.
Yeah. And we have 2 black women therapists in the book who talk about like race-based trauma and like and about the importance of being in spaces that are actually made for us. And I think that once I created my own space that I could be comfortable in, and once I got therapy to help me feel more grounded in who that person was, it just flowed out.
Wow. And the black conservatives?
Okay, so
Who's joining that committee?
so first of all, they wouldn't take me in that committee. So even if I wanted to join it, but I mean, okay, there is a strain of black social conservatism that runs through us as a people, right? It's group of people who I consider to be charlatans. They don't actually believe what they're saying. And the way you can tell is when they have their creation stories, they might have been all the way over here, and then when it became popular, now they're all the way over here. And so that kind of play acting, you can't talk to anybody who's out here saying, that slavery is a choice. You can't have a conversation with somebody who says that the only thing that we can do about white supremacy, the only thing we can do about police violence is reach across the aisle. It's just like, okay, we shook hands. Does that mean police violence doesn't happen anymore? But those people, they've made it their vocation to say things that are white supremacist in nature and then make them seem as if they have some sort of original idea that no one else has. So I personally don't engage with those. And those people try to engage with us pretty regularly because, we run a racial justice website. And honestly, a lot of times I'll just email back, thank you for your comments. Then they try to write you back and say blah, blah, and I say thank you. But one more time, I just ignore you. I block you. Because I'm not going to waste my time or my energy, and I'm not going to get hyped and angry and ruin my day talking to people who aren't serious.
Absolutely.
You say a referral to the drop squad.
That's it.
I don't know who, I don't know.
That said, I think that there are some people who not only are really good at talking to those folks and also to white folks, but I think it takes all kinds, right? Everybody has their way that they fight. And you have folks like, I won't name the books, but there are some actually really excellent books that came out in the last year that were written by black women specifically for the purpose of teaching white people about this work. And I think that that's great. Like, I think that there are people who have the temperaments for that and who are and who want to be engaged in that work, and I think it is admirable work, just like our work is admirable. We just ain't it.
Just a different project.
Exactly.
Yeah. We got time for this. So we got these last two in the back.
Me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Hi, I'm really excited to read this book for a lot of different reasons, and I love this idea of white supremacy as a liar, because, and some other things that you said, because I'm not convinced that white folks are in good shape. All the way up, right? And we're seeing evidence of it, and we see how our society functions kind of on the meta. So I really look forward to reading more about it, and I'm wondering if you've dealt at all kind of with that idea, because I think we need to be really careful what we as people of color aspire to and who we emulate, and because the kids are not all right.
We got this last. Yep.
So mine is two-part. One is I work in a ShopRite, in Roxborough. So it's a really interesting community. It's a community of where black and white mix a lot, but the white folk seem to be entrenched in 45. Like, there's no conversation that you can have with a lot of those people that are going to move them from their stance with him. So, I'm gonna try to make this really quick. One of my white colleagues said to me something about Jussie Smollett. I said, "Free Jussie." He said, "Black privilege." My head spins around like 8 times. How do we have these conversations when people's counter arguments are often ahistorical and anti-intellectual? Where do you go from there? How do you have that conversation? Then the second part. Sorry, I'm gonna go to this. I'm from the dance world, and the whole utopian conversation you had about the essay at the end of your book and trance and all of that stuff. I'm sorry. I'm a hopeful person, but dance is one of the most weirdest spaces because people think that it's so welcoming to gay people and I'm a gay man, and it is. But it's also gender conforming and strict and conservative. And if that's at least one of the microcosms of the world that I live in, it's so hard to change people. You can't get a trans woman to be a performer in a company like Alvin Ailey or any of those companies yet, because there's no space to even try to have those conversations in those particular spaces. So if you respond to the black privilege, and how do we address in our own communities? Like, if I look at the just from Philadelphia to Alvin Ailey to all of these spaces, and the energy that we're putting our work into is trying to get us into white companies, white valley companies. Right. And these are my mentors, sorry.
Right, no, it's good. I was gonna say, sister's question about, kind of the status of white people and the mental status, and that kind of their own, in many ways dovetails to the first part of your question about these same people in Roxborough and other places who are kind of ensconced in this idea of whiteness and believing in it and investing in it in a certain way. So those are, so we have two kind of.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to, y'all might have to prompt me and help me remember everything. We're gonna do it together. The first thing is, I don't have those conversations. I am not in the business of arguing with people who don't think I'm human. I can't convince you of my humanity. I can't convince you that I deserve liberation. I can't convince you that I deserve dignity. So I'm not gonna try. That's not for me. Again, like I said, I think that there are people who do that wonderfully, but I am not that person. I'm an Aries. I'm from Cleveland. I ain't got it in me. Perhaps you feel differently.
No, I don't feel differently. No, I mean, I think there's an overvaluing of dialogue. I'll say that. Everybody's like, we need to have this discussion. We need to have more of a discussion. Today we're, okay, that's great. We discussed it. We've been discussing this now for centuries. Trust. We have plenty of evidence of the fact that we have been having discussions. Personally, I'm tired of discussing things. Now, again, I'm 44. Right? I'm a Leo. I'm from Philly. We're at Uncle Bobbie's. So, okay, maybe somebody else who isn't so familiar with this discussion or, wants to have it, that's great. And that is really important work. But I think, again, part of resisting white supremacy is knowing who you are and what you can do and what is good for you and what makes you sick. And trying to argue with people who don't see you as human or believe that you should die because you're black is not a very good conversation to have. And Hillary, wait, one more thing. The black privilege thing, the thing that I would say about that is I hate the fact that even in trying to call out black privilege, they bit off of black people. Because white privilege, white privilege is a thing, right? But then you're just like, oh, let me twist it and say, you're like, no, get your own ideas. Stop trying to flip it all the time. Think about why you always want to flip it, why you want to use our stuff and then flip it to your benefit. Like, just be original and knock it off.
What I heard you say, brother, about the field that you work in, it makes me think, like we talk in the intro of the book, and we talked about it a bit when we're talking about that hierarchy thing. We talk about white supremacy's like little helpers. It's the transphobia, it's homophobia, it's putting down folks who have disabilities. It's all of these things, and when we aspire to whiteness, which looks a lot of different ways. It can look like aspire and have money. It all looks like moving up the ladder, right? So moving closer to those things that person at the top has, having more money, having more access, having, being of the religion that is in vogue for everywhere, forever. And where it is corrosive is when we step on each other to get there. So, when you're in those spaces and you say, you can't have a trans dancer, be in a principal or any role, let alone a principal role, that looks like people reinforcing all of those isms that reinforce white supremacy.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have to topple the entire structure. Because if they're not free, if our brothers and sisters and if all of our family who, are not free, then we're not free.
Absolutely.
Right. And I just want to bounce off of what he said. Just because ex-dancer turned accountant, and I'm gonna try to help you wrap it. But I think one of the things I heard the man say about being in that dance industry, like a lot of us, or if you're a dancer and you're in that industry and you go to the black companies and you're a fabulous dancer, you want to have chances at employment, work, roles. In the major ballet companies, most of them are white. Most of them are white, they're conservative, and they also want the dancers, no matter how talented they are, to look white. Does the book speak about like glass ceilings in these different industries? Because that's a glass ceiling in the art where we're always looking and hoping to have like one person at the top, whether it be somebody to be the principal ballerina or principal male dancer in a white ballet company somewhere, or whether it be somebody to, of color to actually get the chance to run a company. I feel like that's sort of similar in terms of the glass ceiling. Does your book talk about or have any thoughts on the barriers that people face in that?
Yeah, real quick. So I want to answer Hillary Beard's question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to make sure we get to Hillary.
Yeah, so your question about do we talk about how poorly white folks are doing in the book? We don't. We don't necessarily. I think that again, is an important book to be written.
But we center us at every single turn.
And Shell, that's my cousin. Everybody's a member of my family. In terms of glass ceiling, I don't think we use that phrase.
We don't, but we do talk about it.
Yes.
Right? We have someone who talks anonymously about what it's like to work in corporate America as a black woman. And we call them microaggressions, but we know that there's nothing small about them that she encounters and how that keeps her, from moving up in her career. We absolutely address it in that way, but we don't use that term. Are there any other places where we specifically talk about it as it relates to career? Bevy's essay where she talks about fashion, about presenting herself as her whole self, and how that has impacted her career ultimately for the better, but that she had to get to a place where she believed that could be so. We do address it within industry as well.
My sister's essay.
I was going to say
like her whole discussion about these so-called microaggressions and how they can traumatize you and distract you. And somebody said something to you 20 years ago and you're still sitting there like, why didn't I say that? You're still processing that. So yeah, we don't necessarily use glass ceiling, but we definitely allude to being held back because of who we are.
Absolutely. Everybody, the book is called How We Fight White Supremacy. It's a wonderful book by two wonderful editors who assembled an amazing group of people. I encourage everybody to get this book, get a copy for your friend, get a copy for that person at your job that need it. And also make sure we support two black women who have taken the time to do this.